All of our files are free and will remain free. If you like the show, you can show support by donating $1 to help with expenses. Just use the PayPal link on our website, YouTube channel, or Facebook page. Thanks.
Welcome back to part 2 of the forum today called The Case for a Breakaway Civilization, and we have with us Mr. Richard Dolan. And we were talking, Richard, about different possible leaks that could show us breakaway civilization. But I wanted to ask you also that you were mentioning reasons for why they would keep this undercover. And I know it's a no-brainer, but for many people who never thought about this before, I think it's important to also get these basic questions covered. So I would ask you, is it sensible to speculate that one of the reasons it may be classified is not just egotistically, let's not rock the boat, let's keep our wealth, but could it also be that this can be a door to a new weapons technology that's so dangerous and so destructive and easily reproduced if it's out there, that in the wrong hands it's a complete hazard for the whole planet?
Absolutely. I think there's a number of reasons, some obviously selfish and others just reasonable and logical why some of this technology would be withheld. Think about it. I remember a statement that the scientist Hal Puthoff had. Now, I mentioned Hal Puthoff in the last segment relating to remote viewing, but he's also an expert in what's called zero-point energy. And Hal once made the statement, he said, there could be enough energy in a cup of coffee that could be extracted, that could be used to blow up the entire Pacific Ocean. Potentially, if when you get to the zero-point energy field of our reality. So let's just say that one of the things that were discovered in this classified world is a weapon that would actually be that profound. Do you let this information out to the rest of the world? It's a real question. There's always going to be someone who's crazy or who might do something as insane as blow up the Pacific Ocean or what have you. And so it could be, and if you don't know how to control it, you might just say, you know what, this is way too important to share with the world, and we've got to figure out a way to keep this secret forever. So this is a possibility. I don't know that this is the case, but I can assume with greater scientific understanding comes greater potential for weaponizing that science. I do know that I've had long conversations with responsible researchers who've made it clear that weaponizing this technology is very, very important. So, in terms of a variety of things, you have electromagnetic weaponry, extra low frequency weapons, you have high-powered microwaves, to say nothing of propulsion breakthroughs and material science breakthroughs that I think come through with this. And then technologies that actually literally are mind control technologies. This sounds really fantastic to someone who hasn't studied it, but in fact, if you look at contemporary U.S. military technologies, they work with all of those things, including mind control. There are technologies to put voices in your head. That's real. That exists. That's existed for quite some time, and only now it's really being discussed in some of the open literature. So in the black budget world, if you've got these technologies, it would be very easy to see why they wouldn't want that to leak out to enemies or undesirables.
Yeah, but even if there is such a thing as back-engineered retrievals, etc., they have had over 50 years, and we know how much just a couple of years means in this evolution, and they're still holding back the goods. Many aspects of this technology is out there. Like you just said, there are precedents for this. But they're still not updating so there is a particular wall when it comes to the essence of this technology.
I agree. I think probably, in my opinion, the primary reason for the secrecy on all of this one would be weaponry, but the other would be energy. This is my own opinion on it. I mean, look, even a child seeing the movement of a flying saucer, silent, instant acceleration, things like this, is probably going to realize that it is not using petroleum as its primary source of energy. Just doesn't seem to be a logical thing. So whatever the answer to the UFO propulsion mystery happens to be, my feeling is it implies a post-petroleum civilization. And to say that's a huge thing. We have our entire global infrastructures based on petroleum, not just our energy, but our financial infrastructures. The U.S. domination of the world is based on the petrodollar. This is a very important thing. So if that were to go away, in other words, if we understand the secret of UFO propulsion, it's not going to take very long for scientists, even who are not in the classified world, to think, oh, wow, there really is a solution here. Let's figure out what it is. They won't even need to pry the secret out of the black budget world. They'll figure it out, guaranteed. And that changes our world so radically. To transform the petroleum paradigm, I do think is a frightening prospect for these people who control it. And it changes too much.
That ties directly into your book, After Disclosure. We'd like to have you back.
That's right.
Yeah, we'd like to have you back just on that. But you can go back in time and you can see, you mentioned Tesla, you can go all the way back to the 19th century actually to find examples of a related technology. But as you know very well, there are dozens of contemporary projects not in the black world out there trying to get this breakthrough. And what you're saying then is that if they get that breakthrough, if someone manages to show anti-gravity or free energy, right, which I don't know if it will be manufactured nonetheless because they still have the complete production control, but just it's out there. Do you think then that the incentives to keep this compartmentalized and off the books will be reduced severely?
Maybe. The real question that we have, one of the big breakthroughs in our world these days is 3D printing. And this is we're not yet at the point in our 3D printing technology where this can happen right now, but maybe 10 years from now, that let's say some intelligent person in some part of the world, doesn't matter where, they come up with what we would call a free energy device. There's a lot of very brilliant people in the world right now working on what they call energy harvesting devices, what we might call free energy. I can't say that they're all legitimate. I don't know, but I have to think some of them are probably not bogus. I was at a conference, in fact, with Joseph Farrell about a year and a half ago. I think he wasn't there. I'm sorry. I'm getting my people mixed up. But I did speak with a lot of these energy people, and they're fascinating. They do absolutely amazing work.
Yeah, I think I saw your talk from that. You were the UFO guy on that conference.
I was the UFO researcher there. Yeah, it was funny because when in that community, as with any of the other like alternative community, whether it's 9/11 or JFK, they're afraid of dealing with UFO people like myself. But I find privately they're fascinated by the UFO phenomenon. It was gratifying for me when I was at that conference. Most of those researchers knew about my work and they were interested in it. I had good conversations with them. But publicly they're very careful, and I understand. But that was a fascinating conference, and I met a number of brilliant people who I think are working on some. So let's just say that one of them hits the home run, and they succeed, and they decide, I'm going to give this to the world, and they upload a CAD design, a computer-aided design of their device.
It's the only thing that will protect them from being killed. I'm convinced of that.
So I agree. So that you would then download it to your computer, and now you have it. And you could find a 3D printer with next generation 3D printing, which you can do mixed materials, integrated circuits, probably even biological materials. And maybe you could print it yourself and go off the grid. And you can say, screw you to your utility company, and you don't have to pay your bill. I think that this is a real possibility. And this is, in fact, why I think that the United States and other countries are pushing like the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, TPP, and now there's others. There's one called TISA, TISA, and there's others, the Transatlantic Free Trade Agreement. All of these, I think, are designed to create a transnational corporate legal structure that would probably prevent this exact type of thing from happening. So that if some person in Mumbai, India, comes up with some genius free energy device, he might find that it conflicts with classified patents in the U.S. black budget, and he can't do it. I can just see this happening. I really believe that some of the impetus for this globalization, there's a lot of reasons for it, clearly, but I think one is to try to nail down a corporate, global, basically a totalitarian infrastructure that prevents this type of file sharing from occurring. Basically a future version of the Pirate Bay, where people can download this type of technology and print it in their living rooms. I think so. It's like a foot race between the people and the powers that be globally.
It makes so much sense. I never connected the TSA or whatever it's called to this, but now when you point it out,
it makes me wonder. Obviously, there's a lot we don't know. The things that we know have just been leaked. WikiLeaks, of course, did a very big leak. We get little bits and pieces. There's a lot we don't know. But yeah, I think this is a real possibility.
Okay, so retracting back a little to the basic concept here of breakaway civilization. Let's say now that even if they have bargained Nazi technology, if they have found something very ancient, or maybe even some cousins of us who's dropped by some toys, no reason why they have this. The fact is that they do have it. What's the earliest point you're confident that American, whoever is the power that be there, have it?
That's a great question, Al. I pushed the date back probably to the early 1940s. When I wrote my first volume of history, I started it in 1941, but I would love to revise that book one day. And because I didn't talk about the Cape Girard UFO crash of 1941. Everyone knows about Roswell of 1947, but there's been some very interesting research about a case in the state of Missouri, not far from St. Louis, at a place called Cape Girard, and there's a reasonably interesting case that a anomalous non-human technology was recovered in that year, 1941. There was no Area 51 at that time. The technology seems to have been taken to Washington.
And no CIA either.
No. In fact, not even an OSS that was just being created.
Yeah.
But you did have Army intelligence, and you had Navy intelligence. So there was an intelligence community. But anyway, I think in the United States case, that's the first instance, I would say 1941, where it does seem to me possible that we acquired some highly exotic technology. And in fact, that makes more sense in connecting it to the development of the transistor than Roswell. The transistor was patented in 1947, and some researchers in the past try to connect that to Roswell, but that's really too quick to get something in the summer of 1947 and then have Bell Labs patent a transistor right after that. Doesn't make sense.
But I believe Dr. Farrell has substantiated that to European scientific research of the 30s, that there was actually a human precedence for this technology in Europe.
There were precedents to the transistor. I think that's probably true, and you could probably make the case. On the other hand, the work on the transistor happened actually not very far in the United States from where the crash occurred.
That's interesting.
And there's some very good work by Dr. Bob Wood, who's now in his 80s, who connects the transistor to the crash at Cape Girard, and he looks into the very controversial so-called majestic documents, which some people have disputed, but others, including Bob, who researched it, think are legitimate. It would be, if the transistor has a relation to acquired technology, it would be.
That's it.
That would be it, but it also wouldn't be dismissing the prior work that was done in the human infrastructure on it. It would just simply indicate that maybe we got an assist along the way.
But regardless of the transistor, we do have a potential crash here, which obviously they must have played around with anyway.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Actually, the case for the Cape Girard crash is not a bad one. You've got some witness testimony, but these seem to be very detailed and honest people. But that's really all you've got. A couple of interesting stories that have been researched by, I think, good, responsible researchers in the past, and it's essentially testimony.
But no rumors of alien bodies or anything of that sort?
No, there actually was the claim that there was at least one alien body at the Cape Girardeau crash in 1941, along with technology.
Okay.
So it's people can research that and they can Google it.
But I guess there's always claims about bodies in every crash, so isn't it?
From the information that we can get, some of the crashes we have very limited information about, and bodies are not discussed in all of them. I mentioned a case from April 1962 outside of Las Vegas. I think that this was a crash, but we don't have enough information as to whether there were bodies. And there are a few cases like this. I mean, there may have been, may not. I have no idea.
I may as well just pitch my first prepared, reserved question for you now then, and that is, I'm wondering about the connections between Nazis and UFOs. By the way, is there any UFO crashes that you know of where there has been human bodies claimed?
No. There are some cases of people seeing completely human-looking pilots or operators of the craft. Quite a few of those. And
human-looking would...
like completely human-looking.
Yeah, that would suffice to be defined as human beings. I mean, if they're completely human-looking, what else do you have to go on?
Right.
So,
no, I see your point. But
yeah.
I guess what I'm saying is, look, we can get into some really strange stuff here. I've interviewed individuals who have encounters with human-looking people who do not seem human at all, who seem intensely telepathic.
Oh yeah, right. Yeah, paranormal.
There's some very, very odd things about some of these people. But no, I take your point. So these are very, very human, presumably human pilots. One of them is a Project Blue Book file from 1954. At a U.S. base at I think at the Azores Islands, somewhere in the Atlantic. A U.S. airman, saw a landed craft. A human guy gets out of the craft, doesn't say anything, but smiles, makes some gesture, and then gets back into the flying saucer and takes off. I mean, This is an actual Project Blue Book report, and they could not explain it, and they did not debunk it. It's quite fascinating. But that's not a crash. So crashes of human bodies, I'm not aware of any.
Okay. Well, it's not that I'm on a witch hunt against ET explanations here, but it's just that those constitute so much of the material, and if we know that humans are playing with this technology, certainly it should be interesting to try to find out which cases could be connected to humans.
I could not agree more. I mean, it's we have to remind ourselves that the U in UFO is unidentified. We still don't know, and there are connections to a secret human infrastructure that we have to investigate.
Exactly.
So at the same time, when you go into the history of these encounters, both military and non-military, we are continually coming into descriptions of beings that are described as nothing other than just alien. And this has happened not hundreds but thousands of times. So the question is, what do we do with that information? So when you have people describing gray aliens with big black eyes and big heads again and again and again and again and again, at some point I have to ask myself, is this all just confabulation? Is this mind control? Or is it real? And so that's what I come down to. I think.
But a phenomenon can be real, even if the most likely explanation doesn't have to be genuine, even if a phenomenon.
No, I agree. And so we have to be cautious and provisional with our conclusions.
But what about Nazi connections? Do you know of any?
I do, yeah, for sure. Back in the 1930s and 40s, the Germans, of course, had a kind of a brilliant self-taught man named Viktor Schauberger, who on his own, was starting to make his own breakthroughs in disc-shaped, airframes and understanding principles of levitation.
Yeah.
And his work, he was literally told by the SS during the war that he would work for them.
Yeah, he got a meeting with Max Planck and Hitler, actually.
Yeah. That's right. They were fascinated. Schauberger was an extremely brilliant man, and had about this, and during the later years of the war, I know that he built several prototypes of flying discs, and I really need to write about this, but I was shown one of them. So I saw one of Viktor Schaubergers' flying disc, at least as was told to me, by a scientist in the classified world who had access to it.
What do you mean, a model or an actual?
An actual one that Schauberger.
You mean a picture, or he showed you the
No,
disc?
the thing, like I touched it.
Wow.
Yeah.
This is huge.
You couldn't get into it. It was about 3 feet in diameter. It was brass colored.
Okay.
And according to the scientist, he said this is one of 2 that Schauberger made. The other one was damaged or destroyed during tests. This one was not tested. In the scientist's opinion, by the way, the principles of what Schauberger was working on were sound, except his material science was weak. That, in other words, that this could not survive the RPMs and that were necessary to get it up in the air and to last for much longer than a short period of time. That was his, as I'm.
Yeah, but he used poetic because he wasn't a trained scientist. He described stuff poetically, and I understand his technology was based upon implosion principle, which is very interesting.
That is interesting. See, right? He was probably able to come to these ideas because he wasn't formally trained as a scientist and hit upon something that presumably was very important. But yeah, this is a true story. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to contact that scientist and say, look, what's the follow up to this? And I will, and when I get it, I'll write about this.
Excellent.
But this is a true story. So I watched it. I looked at it in this man's office, and he told me, and I know this guy fairly well, and he was explicit that this was from Schauberger's lab. He was in touch with Schauberger's family, in fact, about this, whether they were going to get it or not. So I will follow up. But it's quite fascinating, and the point is relating to the Nazi
Or Germans, if there's any cases connected to Germans or Nazis.
There's the case, and Joseph Farrell's written about this in much greater detail than I have, but the Prague flying saucer of late World War II, and that this is allegedly a craft that flew at many thousands of miles per hour. Presumably, it was too late in the war for the Germans to mass produce it and have it make a difference in the war, is what we're told. The problem, and then you have the Bell, the Glock.
Yeah. We've covered that in some depth.
Yeah. No, I mean, all of these. I'm as intrigued by the German UFO connection as probably any researcher, but I keep coming down to that when you start looking at actually the quality of the evidence, it's actually not any stronger. In fact, in a lot of cases, it's weaker than the evidence for an extraterrestrial connection to UFOs. I mean, really, what are we looking at? We're talking about testimony post-World War II Czechoslovakia relating to the Bell. I'm not discounting it, but there's just not a lot to sink your teeth into. And this goes also with the the Nazi UFO designs. They were working on these things, and the question is, how far do they go? And is this the origin of the UFO phenomenon? And I would categorically say it is not the origin of the UFO phenomenon. There are very good going into the 30s and 20s and prior.
Yeah, what about Betty and Barney Hill and that other guy, the first guy who is associated with the UFOs in America in popular literature? What's his name? He created...
Well, Kenneth Arnold?
No, not Kenneth Arnold. Another guy. He allegedly people from Venus and I think...
Oh, George Adamski.
Yeah. So Adamski and Barney and Betty Hill. You know these cases very well. Isn't there some Nazi perception?
Well, in the case of Barney Hill, so Betty and Barney Hill had an apparent abduction experience in 1961 in the eastern U.S. in the state of New Hampshire. And they had something very strange happen to them. And under hypnosis a couple of years later, Barney did say, "Oh my God, they're Nazis! They're Nazis!"
And he was a black man, by the way, wasn't he?
That's right. They were an interracial couple, and in 1961, that was still somewhat unusual. Yeah. But Betty and Barney Hill were both. I met Betty actually not before she died, and I know her niece Kathleen Martin quite well. But Betty and Barney were both very, very, people of high integrity and very intelligent. And Barney was a civil rights. Both of them were into civil rights activism, and Barney had been in the U.S. Army back in his earlier years.
Huh. Interesting.
Now the question is, what did he actually mean by that? Because he didn't describe these individuals as human beings. He described them as basically looking non-human. So the question is, did he actually think they were true Nazis from Germany, or was this some other, connection that he made for reasons that we don't really know? And I think it's fair to ask that. There have been people to try to connect this to the Nazis, and I just don't know how strong a case you can make for it, to be honest with you.
That's okay, but there is something there,
there
at least in 1961.
Yeah, and in Adamski's case, back in the 1950s, this is a man who claimed to have direct contact with people who said they were from Venus, and they had the long, beautiful blonde hair, and they were like basically Norwegian supermodels coming in their spacesuits.
Except for our supermodels don't necessarily have blonde hair, but okay,
there you
go
go.
on.
Right.
I get your point.
Basically, the non-Scandinavian idea of the stereotype of Scandinavian is blonde hair.
Yeah.
And I've been to Norway, my man. I love Norway, and there are a lot of blonde people there.
Yeah, sure. We have our share.
Yeah, that's right. But anyway, in Adamski's case, he's very problematic, in my opinion. The famous case where he had in 1952, where he claimed to meet with an alien which he called Orthon, which was from Venus. The people who were with him did sign an affidavit that he did it, but then what we learned later is that they actually never saw the being. He went off on his own and had this conversation, he said, and then he came back and told him about it. And this was Adamski's way of doing things. He also claimed later to meet with the Pope, and it was the exact same thing. He had two friends with him at the Vatican. He says, "I'm going in to talk to the Pope." And he was gone for 30 minutes or so, and then comes back and said, "Oh yes, I met with the Pope." I mean, when you actually look at the details, it's absolutely implausible that he met with the Pope. But so I don't really know what to make of Adamski. On the other hand, can we speculate that there's a classified human infrastructure of individuals who are blonde or predominantly blonde, who seem to be telepathic, who seem to be having their own kind of infrastructure separate from the rest of us? And I will say that I think the answer very possibly is yes.
Well, I can assure you one thing. Our retarded intelligence community up here would not be involved in that.
Oh, the Scandinavian intelligence community?
Yeah. Not the public ones, at least.
Well, I'm encouraged to hear that, then. That's good. But there are a number of these. There are interesting cases of individuals who've had encounters with predominantly blonde, although not always blonde, but often very good-looking male-female combinations, often dressed impeccably, who seem to be able to get inside other people's heads. It's very strange.
So there's often females involved in the blonde reports.
Yeah, female and males and females.
Because that's not the case in Men in Black, I guess. That's usually men, isn't it?
That's true. And there are still people who talk about the Men in Black phenomenon. What does one make of some of these things? You're getting stories from individuals. They're very difficult to prove. They're impossible sometimes to prove. That are extraordinary claims, and of individuals who come to visit them, try to intimidate them. They don't seem quite right. There are genuine Men in Black type encounters that, at the very least, are from classified intelligence operations. This has definitely happened. So maybe that's the Men in Black phenomenon. I don't know.
I think the agencies in America need a better fashion advisor. To upgrade their costume.
What they really need is a civilian-based judge and jury system to prosecute them and investigate them. But
yeah. So one thing is the uniforms, but when we talk about the agencies and stuff, you mentioned that NSA was rather unknown in the beginning, but which agencies do we have a solid case for, in one way or the other, is involved in the cover-up and maybe also the technology, the science of these aircrafts?
Well, I'll answer that on two levels. So one is in the confirmed declassified literature, what agencies have definitely had an interaction with the UFO phenomenon.
Yeah.
Those agencies, without a doubt, are the CIA, the FBI, all of the military intelligence, Navy intelligence for sure, but also Army intelligence and Air Force intelligence, all of them. The Defense Intelligence Agency, that is the DIA, has had definite interaction with this phenomenon. And I'm basing all of these claims on the declassified literature,
Sure.
the declassified documents that we have. All of these agencies have described this. Also NORAD, North American Air Defense. Now, in the case of NORAD, since the Reagan era, they have been completely exempted from Freedom of Information Acts. NORAD can voluntarily release information if they choose, but they are not obligated legally to release anything whatsoever. Having said that, there's outstanding documentation, at least from the 1970s, showing that NORAD also was tracking significant UFOs violating sensitive U.S. airspace in the 70s. So,
what about NASA?
Yeah, NASA. Yes, NASA has had interaction with this phenomenon without a doubt. You've got, first of all, you have the testimony of many U.S. astronauts from the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo programs who have discussed very openly objects that they saw in space that they were not able to explain. And, even most recently, Buzz Aldrin, who is a guy whose head I would love to get inside for a little while and know what he's actually thinking. Buzz Aldrin, a couple of years ago, made the statement that on their way to the moon, this is long when they're out of Earth orbit, out of close Earth orbit, there was an object that was outside their command module that they didn't know what it was. He put this statement out there. Now, you can't say that this is a satellite. I mean, they're past all of that, and they're on the way to the moon. And then a day or two later, he made a correction to the statement. And he said, "Oh, it's my understanding that we simply we had ejected. It was an ejection from the craft, and it was something else that we had seen there. It was one of our own things." But honestly, his explanation just did not ring true, and it seemed that he was very much. I mean, think about it. 40 years had gone by, and Aldrin had been thinking about this, and he literally did not get an explanation for 40 years, and then he says it publicly, and then they correct him publicly. I find that very difficult to believe. Yeah. So I think NASA certainly has connections. There are a number of NASA employees from from the 1970s onward who've talked about NASA involvement in the UFO phenomenon.
Like Ken Johnston. And
Maurice Chatelain is the one who comes to mind most. He was a very, I forget his exact position, engineer, I think, worked at NASA for a number of years and talked explicitly about UFO knowledge inside NASA.
Isn't there other astronauts too? I remember often seeing the names of Cooper and Mitchell in this mix.
Well, yes. Gordon Cooper, who I never knew, and Edgar Mitchell, who I do know, both have spoken very explicitly about this. Gordon Cooper may be the most qualified pilot that NASA had. Many people felt that he was the best. When he was a U.S. pilot in Germany in the 1950s, he talked explicitly about his encounter with UFOs there. And then over at Edwards Air Force Base in 1964, he did not see it directly land, but he spoke with Air Force personnel who came running to him with photographic evidence of a landed flying saucer that they spoke to him at. And he said he looked at the negative after it was developed, and he said it absolutely looked like exactly what they were talking about, and then said that those negatives were confiscated the very next day. By men in black suits.
Of course.
And then Edgar Mitchell, who was in Apollo 14, who was the sixth man to walk on the moon, never said that he saw a UFO, never said that he saw an alien being, but has spoken explicitly, at least for a while he did, about ultra-high level connections that he had within the U.S. government, who spoke to him explicitly about alien bodies and technology. And, when you're an Apollo astronaut like Edgar Mitchell, who's not going to want to be your buddy? So he can really speak to a lot of these individuals, and this was Edgar Mitchell's statement, which I think is quite interesting.
Oh, indeed.
The other agency that I think is important in the cover-up that very few people talk about is the NRO, that is the National Reconnaissance Office. And we talk about the NSA being secret, but the NRO is even more secret. They were founded in 1961, and for 30 years, it was a felony for any member of Congress to mention the NRO in public.
Wow.
So it was incredibly secret for a longer period of time than the NSA was, and to this day, there's very little. We know that the NRO monitors, or at least we're told that they monitor all of America's spy satellites. So classified satellite. So they're in space. That's what they do. And I think that there's been some very good analysis connecting the NRO to monitoring UFOs, particularly if you have a component of this phenomenon that is in space, UFOs in space, Earth orbit. The NRO would absolutely be involved in this. And there are a couple of these cases that we know through the 70s and 80s and 90s of objects being tracked by our satellites. So,
what about DARPA?
Yeah, DARPA is an interesting one. I haven't really researched the DARPA connection to UFOs, and perhaps I should. Certainly, DARPA is very, very key in developing advanced technology for the United States military. And right now, we hear a lot about DARPA creating Terminator-style robots, I think is really what they're getting in the news for. I don't know, but I would assume that some of this information comes their way.
Yeah, they get the goodies.
I would think so, yeah.
They are more like...
But I don't know.
No, but the trail probably ends at their laboratories. They get the goodies and they make it.
Yeah. I think what happens is, one of the things that's been important for me to discuss with this cover-up, and this includes the Breakaway Civilization, is the privatization of the secret itself.
Right.
So people talk... they ask, well, how can the government keep the secret? And I think, when we say something as loose and broad as the government, we're really not doing ourselves any favors. No. I think what happens is that these secrets become privatized. It's not simply that they become classified, they become proprietary information. So if I'm the U.S. Army and I've recovered something, again, I'm going back to the alien crash retrieval, but let's just say, so I have this highly, highly exotic technology. Who's going to study it? Who's going to... Well, the Army might have some pretty smart scientists, but ultimately I'm going to need to give it to Boeing or Lockheed or Raytheon or General Electric because they've got the manufacturing and they also have the scientific and research and development people who can study this and actually do something with it. And they're contractors. So at some point they get it. And then the question becomes who owns it? Who owns the technology? They'll make some breakthroughs. They will patent whatever breakthroughs they make. And really, as far as the rest of the world goes, it's simply a breakthrough at Boeing. It's simply a breakthrough by Bell Labs.
So some corporation owns it, but then we have to look at the structure behind the corporations. Who owns the different corporations?
Well, exactly. This is a really hard thing to do. I've tried looking into this. Like who are the dominant shareholders of the dominant corporations? This is really tough to find this information.
There is a very good TED talk on this, not from a UFO approach, of course, but just in general.
Oh.
Because it's been a lot of focus on the so-called superclass.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about tinfoil Illuminati conspiracy theorists here. I'm talking about researchers who established that there is like 300 families and 6,000 people at the top of our current hierarchy.
Well, and this is mainstream news, but the top 80th,
yes.
The 80th wealthiest people in the world have as much wealth combined as the bottom half of humanity.
Exactly.
The top 80.
Yes.
Less than 100 people have as much as the bottom half.
So this should be identifiable people,
Exactly. So, what are the corporations that they own? What's the percentages? And
then there's cartels. They hide behind, structures like that. So.
And as you say, this is not tinfoil hat conspiracy theory. This is fact. And then, ask yourself, well, will these individuals be inclined to collaborate amongst each other to get what they want? And the answer obviously is yes. They're in the best position to do so. Not people like you and me who have, no wealth, but those who have tremendous means and who obviously know each other, probably talk with each other, yes, they are the most likely individuals to get together to talk informally about because these are the people who can manipulate governments. And this is what the Bilderberg meetings are about every year.
Yes, but then the question begs itself, how much do they really know? Because these guys are owners and cashing in on stuff. But then again, if I'm in an agency or in a black arm of an agency where I have a team flying around here, there, when there's no oversight, when there's compartmentalization, I control what to tell the people behind. So a big question would be, because you have already implicated all agencies in America. So the big question is, which one of these agencies do you think have black arms where they're hands on playing with this?
Exactly. Who's actually, and your point is an outstanding point. Just because the top wealthiest people are in a position to control, it doesn't mean that they really even care or are managing it. They have their own people.
Yeah.
Right. They have their own organizations. So presumably, even someone like David Rockefeller, would have maybe his own individuals who might be his point men. Maybe.
I mean, the president don't have a need to know basis. The president, who's so-called overseeing many of these agencies, the same could be the case in private industry.
No, absolutely. I think your point is extremely well taken. So the question is, and who and where is it? And I don't have the answer to this. I think what we have in the United States system is a black budget system of what are called special access programs, and then unacknowledged special access programs. And there's a whole nomenclature of terms to describe the deeply, deeply classified nature of the American national security empire.
Yeah.
And within that structure, which many analysts other than myself have also said this is privatized. We're talking some mainstream analysts here, that it's primarily dominated by private industry. And the fact is that no one really knows who's running it or how much money it takes in. What we know is that it's a black empire. It's a black budget empire that we don't have any control over this.
I imagine CIA and NSA are deeply involved.
Yes, I would agree with you. I think, and also Navy intelligence, U.S. Navy intelligence there just are too many connections that we've had over the last 60, 70 years that have connected Navy intelligence, also Air Force intelligence. So my guess is that there is a small clique that has control over the whole thing. I mean, look, you've had researchers talking about MJ-12. I think an organization like MJ-12 makes the most sense, to be perfectly honest with you. You'd have a very small group of people, and they have their connection to the intelligence community, also the international intelligence community, also private industry. You've got to pull a lot of strings here. You have to be able to manage the media and make sure that the establishment media continues to play along.
Oh, they do a good job.
That's right. And then the political institutions, and so that would require a very high level group of puppeteers who are really pulling the string.
But that's the decision making. We know already 20 years ago, if we'll take McKinnock's finds seriously, that there was astronauts or military men drafted to this space fleet.
Right.
So there would be people involved at some level who doesn't take decisions like MJ-12 or any shadow government, but just like a certain infrastructure. And what I'm getting at, the reason I'm asking you is that I want you to elaborate a little on how we see this scenario about the breakaway civilization. Because are they a breakaway only in technology or also in geography? Are they connected to our civilization? I mean, if you're a Jude working for them, you have a mother and a father, etc.
Right. Great question. Over the last few years, I've had a few individuals correspond with me. None of these individuals are people that I can confirm who they are.
Okay.
All right. So I was just going to say that some of them can talk a very good game, and they seem very intelligent, and they give me descriptions of their connections to this black budget world, this breakaway civilization. So in other words, I'm saying I've had a couple of individuals, a small handful, who've written to me, who've given me reason to think that they're part of such a group. I have never I've never been influenced in any of my thoughts by these people in terms of publishing anything or saying anything definitive. But one of them made a point to me that has stuck with me, I will say, and his point was, look, we I have family here on Earth, or I have not on Earth. I have family here in this normal infrastructure. That there are vast underground facilities that I would, he said, you would call a breakaway civilization. So in other words, I go to work, and I may be gone for months at a time, and I'm living an absolutely crazy life, he would say. But I come home and and I mow the lawn, and I have neighbors, and I have family, and I have family reunions, and so in other words, and that actually would make sense to me, whether this individual is truthful or not with me. That type of scenario makes sense. It seems to me that Earth is where the action is. So even if you have a base on the far side of the moon, let's say, or if you have a base on Mars, maybe if that's true or not, nevertheless, it would seem most logical to me that Earth is where most of these individuals would be. It would seem to me that they may have families who are completely in on the secret, but they may have families who are not in on the secret. And we know for sure that this is actually how the military classified world does operate.
Manhattan Project?
Yeah. A husband can go off to work. He says goodbye to his wife. He goes in, he punches the clock at the Navy, and then he punches another clock that takes him into a black budget operation that his Navy people don't know about, and his wife certainly doesn't know about. And then within that program, he would go into yet another nested classified program. In other words, you have got classified programs hidden within classified programs within classified programs. It actually works that way. And the reason for it is that if somehow his most classified program were to be exposed in some way, you could say, no, that's nonsense. But he was working in this classified program, and here's proof for that. So in other words, it's you want these layers of deception.
Plausible deniability, yes.
Exactly. So but in the case of spouses of some of these individuals, their husbands or wives, I think often would be clueless about what their spouse is doing. And we just know this from the history of the military, that spouses often are in the dark about what their partner was involved in. And I assume it's similar with this. So you could have someone in a so-called breakaway civilization, as I've called it many times, but it doesn't mean that they're all living underground and under the surface of Mars. It doesn't have to mean that, and I've said this many times. So I think that you could have an entirely classified infrastructure where someone goes to work, and that's where they go.
The go-to guy for underground stuff is Richard Saunders.
Yes, Richard Sauder, indeed.
Sauder.
I published one of his books. I'm his publisher for his last book, which is Hidden in Plain Sight, which is a very fine book.
We'll need to get him on for that topic.
Yeah, he's living in Ecuador. He's been in South America for some time, but you might be able to find him on Skype. I could probably get you in touch with him.
Yeah, let's try that.
Yeah.
But back to your point then. That means that this makes sense why you guys are so much focused upon economy, because like everyone knows, if you want to crack the deepest secrets, follow the money.
That's right.
And how many big cases haven't been cracked because of something so trivial as tax documents? Mm-hmm. So yeah, I can see why you guys are trying to substantiate the case with following the financial aspect.
Well, it's hard, and that's really not my expertise, unfortunately. I'm not a trained economist or financial whiz, but I'm lucky in that I get to talk to a few people who are, and one of them is Catherine Austin Fitz, who's a very good friend of Joseph Farrell and mine. We both love Catherine. She was in the establishment, and she's basically gone renegade, I guess you could say. So Catherine was high-level cabinet position in the presidency of George Bush Sr., so from 1989 to 1993, she was Assistant Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. That's one of the cabinet positions in the White House. And she is a financial expert. And and she's talked a lot about the real black budget, not simply classified federal spending, but drug trafficking money and securities fraud money, and how this really flows through the intelligence community. So Catherine and I have talked a lot about this, and
we already know this from the Iran-Contra scandal and its deep ramifications. There was a lot of CIA, DAA involvement.
Well, and Iran-Contra for sure, and even prior to that, you have CIA operated drug running out of Southeast Asia, the so-called Golden Triangle, heroin trafficking. These are all with CIA aircraft, known as Air America, written about by a lot of former CIA officer Viktor Schaubergers, for example, who wrote the CIA and the Cult of Intelligence. And then prior to that, you have CIA connection apparently to the members of Chiang Kai-shek when he went into Taiwan after Mao Zedong took over in 1949 in China. Some of Chiang's people went into Burma, and this is in the very early 50s, and we're selling heroin out of Burma. A Burmese minister goes to the American ambassador and says, "Hey, can you please get Chiang's military the hell out of my country?" And the U.S. ambassador either was an idiot or a liar, and he said, "I don't know what you're talking about. That's not us. The CIA has nothing to do with that. That's the Chinese position, this problem." And the Burmese minister looked at the American and he rolled his eyes, said, "Man, you're an idiot." So when Eisenhower came into the White House, though, in '53, they did quietly remove Chiang's military out of Burma. But the U.S. has been involved in this. Look, back in Italy in 1948, when the U.S. rigged the Italian election that year to prevent communists from winning the election, where does the money come from? If you want to raise secret armies, if you want to rig elections, if you want, all of this money, you need a lot of it, and it's a lot better than having classified tax dollars if you can just get your own private stash. And what better than drug trafficking? It's you don't have to account for it. It's all unofficial money. It's a big slush fund.
Notwithstanding the expenses for developing this technology, it's incredible money.
And developing the technology and then providing security over the technology is all very expensive. So you need an enormous amount of money. Yeah, thanks for bringing me back to the topic here. And so drug trafficking and financial fraud, all of these are very important. None of them get discussed openly in the establishment media, unfortunately, but they're very, very important. So in Catherine Austin Fitz's work, I think she does as good a job as anyone in the world at talking about how it all works and the big financial black hole essentially at the center of the global financial system where trillions of dollars go missing. Where does the money go? I've speculated and others have speculated that some of that money goes into this secret black budget breakaway civilization infrastructure.
Right. Of course, we'll need to have her on just for this financial aspect.
Absolutely.
But getting back to your expertise here, we know that CIA officially has no one over them. They don't need to. They are the most freely organized on the surface of it. But how would, if we are going to substantiate a case where the president has no need to know, how would that practically be possible to pull off? In the CIA's case, yes, that's easy to understand. But in the other agencies, how can we keep a president from knowing? Not counting, of course, people like Bush Sr., who was deep in the loop,
right? But
just a president.
I had a conversation some years ago with a retired CIA. He was more than an officer. He was very, very high level and a very brilliant man who is deeply interested in the UFO phenomenon, probably knows much more about it than I do. And I asked him, first of all, what do presidents know? So what do U.S. presidents know about UFOs? And his answer was interesting. He said, well, some have known more than others. It was his knowledge that Jimmy Carter knew enough, that Ronald Reagan knew enough, that George Bush Sr. knew. In other words, that they knew there was a reality and that we didn't really have a lot of control over that reality. That was his implication to me. He said other presidents, and he talked about Bill Clinton and George W. Bush.
Mm-hmm.
This is before Obama was president when I had this conversation with him.
Mm-hmm.
It was his opinion that neither of them had been briefed sufficiently. And he said, look, you have to understand, presidents come and go. The people running the program are here for life. And actually, he didn't say for sure that Reagan was fully briefed, but he said it was his opinion that Reagan was substantially briefed. I think that's what he said to me. But he said, look, people running the program are they're here for life, and presidents are not always reliable. And he said, literally, he said, some drink, some are not stable emotionally.
Yeah.
They come and they go. And think about what a president has to do. He spends most of his time being a politician, kissing babies, shaking hands, talking to diplomats. He's basically a public relations front.
Yeah, but he's briefed on a daily basis.
He does, but the question is, you have not hundreds, but probably now thousands of black budget operations going on within that community. And I would have to say it's logistically impossible for a president to be on top of all of them. And for a guy like Reagan, for the record, when Reagan was president, he was the oldest elected president in American history, and he was really past his prime. That's just the sad fact of it. And Reagan took naps every day, or just about every day, as president. He literally did. And who ran the Reagan White House? Well, I'll tell you, it was run by Bill Casey of the CIA and George Herbert Walker Bush. They were, and a couple of other people. But Ronald Reagan himself was he was the pitchman. He was the sales representative, as I think most of these people are. Now, there are exceptions. George Bush Sr., I think everyone seems to believe he was in.
Oh, yeah, he's more than a figurehead.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. But your question was, how do you keep it from the president? I think the question depends on the president himself, and how determined are they to find out answers, and how resourceful they are at getting those answers. That's the impression I get. A guy like Bush Sr. was already very much in. I mean, he had been director of the CIA previously, so he was a man with some access, and had done almost certainly George Bush Sr. I think was involved in the Kennedy assassination peripherally, not directly, but I think he was part of the in crowd. So he's been a guy who's been in for a long, long time.
They can trust him.
Yeah, Obama, I would guess probably not.
He doesn't seem to have that much power anyway.
No, he's absolutely as much of a puppet as George W. Bush before him. I don't think there's any question about it.
Only Bush was from the right family, blue blood, 1%ers, old money.
Yeah, in Obama's case, though, he's actually the perfect replacement for Bush. And I know I don't want to get too off topic, but he was the perfect individual to sell brand America to the world. He had the right skin color. He didn't sound like a 12-year-old on TV, and was able to fulfill all of that started under George W. Bush, and he's continued them completely.
So he was a public image upgrade.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I mean, my God, they gave him a Nobel Peace Prize in his first year as president. What the hell was that?
Actually, we did it.
What's that all about?
I'll tell you, it's not that mystical when you follow Norwegian politics up to that case, but when you throw the Norwegian spiral into it, in the mix, you remember?
Oh, yeah. Yes, that's very interesting.
Yeah, then it starts to, and the harp station someone just put up here against our knowledge, and seed bank.
Yep,
yeah,
exactly.
There is a lot of stuff for a field day of conspiracy, for sure. But back to topic.
Underground bases in Norway, too, some substantial ones.
Yeah, well, if it's the Project Camelot approach, that's unfortunately...
No, I'm not talking about that.
Oh, yeah, right.
Actually,
okay.
in Dr. Richard Sauter's work, he came up with some...
Okay, we'll talk with him about that.
Yeah, it's interesting
cool.
stuff.
Yeah, well, we have this relation to underground caves all the way back to Per Gynt and Henrik Ibsen. So,
yeah, that's right.
And even back to the folk tales.
Right.
Yeah, and the folk tales too. They are often connected with UFO lore in a way. There are overlapping between folk tales and UFO. But this is Graham Hancock area.
Before we move on to wrap this up, I just want to point out that Norway has Hessdalen, of course, and the Hessdalen phenomenon, which is truly one of the most fascinating UFO phenomena in the world.
Well documented. There's scientists there.
Absolutely. They've done some outstanding work. I've spoken with the Hessdalen scientists. and they do very good work. And this is something that's been going on, recorded since the 1980s, and it's
and it's all out there on the internet.
absolutely inexplicable.
It's mainstream.
Yeah.
And it's plasma phenomena.
Plasma, as well as there are cases, though, where it seems that they're tracking solid objects, and this is what's so perplexing.
Wow.
You have some, because they would have radar up there at times to track.
Yeah.
So you have, at times, what seems like an absolutely solid object, at other times, some kind of bizarre light or plasma phenomenon, always seemingly intelligently operated, and nobody knows where the hell this is coming from. I mean, there's just nothing up there.
And they're always violating the G-forces.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's incredible. But anyway. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, back to topic. So a breakaway civilization, it's reassuring actually when you speculate that they may still have a very heavy Earth base, because it means that it would be in their interest which way the Earth goes, so to
Hopefully
speak.
they wouldn't want to just say, the hell with Earth. We've got a nice palace on Mars, so
Yeah.
let's let Earth go to hell. I hope that's not the case.
No.
I have to think, I believe that there's probably life elsewhere in the universe, probably a lot of life in the universe.
Oh, for sure.
But I still would think that planets like Earth are not simply, the most common things. I mean, we have a beautiful place here. We've got lots of water. We have lots of genetic diversity. We really it's a wonderful place. And so I have to assume that Earth is valued. And it's certainly valued to me and to you. And this is where we're made to live. This is our place. So I'd have to think that anyone in a breakaway civilization would think, yeah, this is my planet. I don't want to destroy it. God, I hope.
And if not for anything else, then at least for all the resources that are still not plundered.
Sure.
Okay, before we continue about the breakaway civilization, I need to pitch another question to you. Do you have, with your vast knowledge of this phenomenon, do you have any information you can share with us about the poles or about Antarctica?
Antarctica is interesting. Of course, many people who study this topic who believe that there's, let's say, a base on Antarctica, will talk about Operation Highjump. And this is something that took place at the end of 1946 and early 1947.
Yeah, we've had two others on who have elaborated on Highjump.
Well, I just want to point out, though, because I'm not a big supporter of the idea that Highjump ran into a Nazi or ET presence there. I don't completely discount it, but I'm not a supporter. And the reason that I say this is that in the immediate aftermath of Highjump, in the next year, in fact, and in the year following that, 1948 and 49, there were subsequent U.S. expeditions to that exact area that did not result in anyone's death, that were successful. And in other words, that region, it's not like it's been off limits ever since. In fact, it was visited a year later. So if the expedition by Admiral Richard Byrd ran into Nazis with advanced weaponry who warned him away, it didn't really stop Americans from arriving there just a year later and then to continue to explore the area. So
they even blew an atom bomb over that area. Officially, it was tests.
Oh, what year was that? Late 40s?
Joseph writes about this in one of his first books. I think
there were very few
before the 50s, I think.
I have never heard about. Well, I should ask him, because
do that.
To my knowledge, there from 1945 to 1998, there are officially, I think there were approximately 2,050 nuclear detonations, mostly by the United States and the Soviet Union and other nations of Britain, France, and the other nuclear nations, all did above ground and below ground nuclear testing. And all of these are documented, and I am not aware of any of them being documented over Antarctica. So I would like to.
Okay. I'll provide you the info when we're done here
Sure.
in private, and you can take it from there.
Yeah, cool.
Okay, but is there a case to connect Antarctica to UFOs somehow?
Well, there's the statement that was from, I believe it was a Chilean newspaper in the immediate aftermath of Highjump's failure, which Highjump, did end early. And there were deaths connected with the program, and depending on what you read, the deaths were caused by different things. It was an enormous expedition too. It had I think 5,000 people in there. It was huge, and it just didn't go well, and it ended several months early. And there was a statement in the a Chilean newspaper in the immediate aftermath, and I'm simply paraphrasing roughly here, but Richard Byrd apparently said to this journalist, there are powers at the poles. There are powers that can traverse pole to pole, I think is what he said.
Yeah, the future enemy. We must.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the question is, well, what exactly did he mean? And there was never a follow-up that he made publicly to that statement. So
because he got classified immediately at his return.
Well, maybe, yeah. I mean, it is true. There's some things that are very suspicious about it, and it's also true. Obviously, we know this that the Nazis had a significant interest in the southern hemisphere, South America, and they did have an interest in Antarctica. Neue Schwabenland was the area they claimed it. Now, I don't know of any evidence that they did anything more than just drop some flags down there in the 1930s, but they were interested in it. They were absolutely, after the war, many of them did flock to South America. We all know this.
Yeah.
That's a matter of historical record. And
with 20 billion at their books and exotic technology,
gold, art, and absolutely a lot of money and a lot of power. So they went to South America, they went to the United States, they went to a variety of places and maintained an important locus of power. So this is something that really, it's thank goodness we have researchers like Joseph Farrell and also my very good friend and colleague Peter Levenda, who do very good work on the survival of the Nazi power structure in South America primarily. And, whether it had something in Antarctica, I'm not convinced of that personally.
But I must tell you, the Byrd expedition papers are still classified to this day, just so you know.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah.
I agree. It's really, really, I mean, wouldn't we love to be people to get access to those papers and read them?
And thank you for reminding us that people actually died at that expedition and there was material losses, because I think we forgot to point that out when we talked with Levenda and Farrell about this. I don't think we...
Oh, good. Yeah, I'm glad you had Peter on the show as well. I'm glad.
Yeah, we're going to have him back for the precise topic you just mentioned. But it's important to know then that there was losses actually connected to this. But do you know anything about the Linda Moulton Howe information that Levenda mentioned, that there were American scientists and pilots who reported that they had seen some kind of UFO, and they were dispersed all over the world afterwards, not to talk.
Well, I know Linda quite well. I don't know the specific connection here. Now, I will say, though, that Antarctica does have a number of UFO reports. I'm not talking about 1947. But in the 1960s, 1965, there were some very interesting reports from July of 1965. And I believe there were a few other instances of unusual aerial activity that has been reported over Antarctica. So I think there's activity there, or possible activity there. I'm not sure about the case you're referring to here with Linda Moulton Howe. Sorry.
Okay. But no, I mean, when we have such a walking lexica of UFO cases here, I have to ask, because we've had an interest in Antarctica in all our shows. So.
Oh, no, it is fascinating. And I mean, it's such a huge place. And, it seems forbidding to us. But if you've got good technology, you're able to make a secure base there. Hey, it's maybe not a bad place.
Wouldn't it be a good place for the Breakaway Civilization if they're physically breaked away?
Underground.
Yeah.
Look, yeah, actually it would be. If you have access to your own source of energy, what's to stop you from going underground and building a very secure environment there?
And scientists say that in Antarctica, they are pretty sure there's huge caverns and natural pockets of underground structures.
Exactly. You don't even have to hollow it out.
No.
We have the technology to build bases under the ocean floors.
Wow.
That technology, I believe, has existed since the 1960s. Richard Sauder writes about this quite a bit, and I think he's right on. So what we don't have is the proof that they exist, but we do have, excuse me, the plans that were underway in the 1960s to create what were called DUMBs, deep underground military bases, deep, deep, and that includes under the ocean floor. And all you really need to have a base under the ocean floor is two things. You need energy and you need oxygen. You need air. And if you're able to extract oxygen out of the water, which we've had that technology since the 50s, and you have a source of energy, maybe it would be a useful thing to have.
Yeah, I mean, if you can have bases on other planets, at least you can have a base under the...
And this goes for Antarctica. So certainly the possibility, I think we have to acknowledge that there's a possibility there. Now we have to look for the evidence.
I agree. And we only invite on serious researchers who are evidence-based, because in this area it's so easy to take off in directions which may be valid and plausible and everything, but we lose the main population.
I agree. And if we wanted to speculate a little bit, I mean, it is worth asking. I don't really have an answer to this, but it's worth asking if we have a breakaway civilization. That is a group of people who have access to radically advanced science, radically advanced technology, who have probably a different cosmology, even different interactions than the rest of us have normally. So they have a different understanding of themselves.
And as much money as they want.
Exactly. So the question then I ask myself is, what is their goal? What are they actually doing? Why do they need to keep themselves secret? And what goals might they have, and what is their plans for the human infrastructure? To what extent do they dominate or control this human infrastructure? All of these questions come to my mind. What is their relationship, if there is the presence of an other that is here? What is their relationship to that? Or have they had the ability completely to create the illusion of UFOs and aliens? Has that been part of their game? And how advanced are they? Are they centuries ahead of us in our technology? Or these are questions. I don't have the answers to these, but I can wonder if they exist. I would assume that they would have an interest in managing the human infrastructure to the extent that they need to. So they may not really care about a lot of things that go on in the ordinary world of politics and war, but they might want to own what they feel they need to own. That's possible. But exactly what they're doing. Think about this too. The idea of a breakaway civilization actually, has been with us for a long, long time. Just people were not using that phrase. If you read a really fantastic book by from about 100 years ago by a Canadian who went to live in America, Manly P. Hall, a book called The Secret Teachings of the Ages.
Yeah, I know it very well.
This is an actual, I would almost say this is a work of genius. And what Manly P. Hall wrote about were secret societies, and at least in part, going back thousands of years, and the esoteric traditions of the many of the religions of the world. And what he pointed out is that all of these ancient religious traditions had the version for the many, and then would have the esoteric version for the few initiates who had done the hard work to learn the true secret. Now, in his case, the real key was learning the immortality of the soul and how to have that. But all of it was designed around a kind of secret infrastructure that was only open to initiates, that they guarded that knowledge very jealously from the rest of the masses, because they wouldn't deserve to know this if they hadn't done the work. It would be dangerous to give this knowledge to everyone in their opinion. So that could very well be the attitude by those individuals in today's world of what we would call a breakaway civilization, that they might very well think, we have this very, very important knowledge. Most people are idiots. Most people have no education. Most people are wrapped up in their own little world. And if we were to give this powerful knowledge to them, it could really result in a lot of destruction. And so it's just for us to know.
And we will lose power.
And we would lose power. It's so easy to rationalize all of this. And So it's very easy, I think, for those individuals to see themselves as above humanity and the rightful heirs of the secret knowledge. So I actually do think that it works something like that, to the extent that they want to control our civilization and use and plunder. To what extent are they connected to the top 80 wealthy people who own as much wealth as the bottom of humanity? This I don't know. But I would be surprised if there were no relation.
You make a very good case for the natural psychology of this, and that there is a precedence in how we organize us, and especially when we have something exotic, rare, something keeps us over the top. There's always been intelligence operations like that, even in the darkest medieval ages. It's true. I have two final questions for you. First one,
Sure.
If we are to look at indications, circumstantial evidence, well, it's a good thing that the breakaway civilization do marry and have family on Earth, and because it keeps, we hope so. But can we substantiate an approximation of how far ahead they are based upon available data? If you see where I'm going with this. And the second question, just so not to interrupt your flow, is if we look at the history of false flag operations, certainly we see a precedence because this is nothing if not the world's biggest false flag operation. So I guess there is a tie there too. So could you also wrap it up a little about going into the history of false flags?
Gladly I will. And I'll just say off the bat that my current book project is an analytical history of false flag operations. That's actually what I'm working on.
Splendid. Yeah.
It's taking a great deal of my time and energy. It's fascinating and disturbing at the same time.
Sure.
But to answer your first question, wait, what was your first question?
We're taking the liberty of going into long reasonings in this program.
Oh, how far ahead are they? How far ahead is the breakaway civilization? Right. Well, I wonder about things like quantum computing. I wonder about things like advanced artificial intelligence. And are there classified breakthroughs that we are struggling to catch up to? And you get different analyses that are provided on this. Like there are analysts who believe, frankly, that the NSA is really not that far ahead of the rest of the mainstream world anymore. That there's private industry that's racing ahead in terms of microchip technology and the like. That the NSA is really not all that it used to be. But that's different from the breakaway civilization. Can't really equate the NSA with that. So the real question is there in the classified world, are there breakthroughs in quantum computing? And if there is a breakthrough in quantum computing, how long has there been one? And nobody has the answer to this. Right now, you've got a couple of private corporations, including, I think, IBM and some others who are
the usual suspects.
Right now working with kind of proto-quantum computing, and they're making some real success. James Bamford, who wrote some very detailed histories of the NSA, is one of the best qualified people, offered his opinion recently that that they probably had quantum computing at the NSA. And if they have it, it would be at the recently created data collection center in Utah, which is worth billions of dollars, where they are scarfing up every single piece of data, every email, every text, everything you can imagine. They are gobbling it up, and
including this conversation.
Absolutely, of course, they're gobbling up everything, and now whether you have human operators listening to everything is another question. So then the question is, what kind of algorithms do they have for artificial intelligence? We're assuming that they're very far advanced. The question is, are they decades ahead? Are they, for all intents and purposes, working with what we would consider magical technology? I don't know the answer to this question. I have to assume that they're probably a good 10 or more years ahead of us officially, like where we are at in another decade. They must be having that. I have to think. But here's the thing. Every now and then you get these very suggestive statements coming out from people who have been within the military classified world. And they all say the same thing, which is we are vastly ahead of anything you can imagine in your society. And this has come out many times. So does that mean they're 100 years ahead? It could be. If they're that far ahead of us, then they have quantum computing, then they have advanced AI, then they have the ability, they would have the ability to fool us in any way that they would want to, I should think. I would have to think.
Well, in simple years, they're
Yeah.
at least 50 years ahead. But of course...
that could be. You know, I talked about my NSA connection from the 1960s,
Yeah.
and they were at least 3.5 decades ahead in computing power then.
Right. And then we know that scientific development does grow exponentially, so it's not just a matter of being 50 years ahead. That could be...
But that's true. But there's one factor that we have to remind ourselves, which is that our development of the web, of the internet in the last generation, really, could very possibly be an unforeseen development for those individuals. So that, in other words, the fact that we have the web has enabled the vast human society, the great unwashed like you and me, to be able to have an incredibly powerful tool and an incredibly powerful means for us to communicate with each other and to learn from each other and to share data, so that actually
we're catching up.
Right. I don't think anyone in 1985 could really have predicted the world of the web as it is. I just don't think it would have been possible. So this is a real power that we have.
Yeah.
If there had been no web, if they had been able to continue developing their technology without a World Wide Web,
oh my God,
then I would say absolutely they are centuries ahead of us. But the creation of the web is the great gift, the great unexpected boon to us.
Yeah.
And it might actually be allowing us to catch up to them much faster. I'm just putting that out as a theory.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah.
And then false flags.
Well, false flags.
Yeah, you must address that too before we can let you go.
Right. So now it's a good question. I hope maybe I can explore this in the book that I'm writing. If there's a relationship to the Breakaway Civilization, I think there is. What I'm trying to do right now is I'm putting together what I think is really the first ever true history of false flag operations. I started with the assumption that it would cover from ancient times to today.
Oh, you're taking the entire world history.
Well, that's been my goal. And what I've discovered is that, you have a number of websites and analysts who will claim that false flags are an ancient phenomenon and we've had them since forever. That's kind of true and kind of not true. There are a number of cases of ancient society having what might be false flags. Famously, we think of Nero and the burning of Rome, although I don't think that that's the strongest case. But even if it were a true false flag, it would be almost an anomaly. Now, there are what I now call ideological false flags. I've had to create my own terminology for a lot of this. So an ideological false flag today would be like the war on terror, where you create a fake enemy, basically, and you scare the shit out of people. If I can say that, you can edit that out later.
No.
You scare people to create control over them and also to siphon money out of their lives. And then, we've had ideological false flags probably since we've had human civilization. Like the Inquisition is an obvious ideological false flag. So that's different. But the actual false flag operations, I think, is a specifically modern phenomenon. And it really starts in fact, one of the earliest true false flag.
Let me guess, the Nazis?
No, prior.
Prior?
Yeah. You won't guess this, so I'll just tell you.
Okay.
Sweden against Russia in 1788.
Wow.
And there was a Swedish-Russian war.
Yeah.
There was a Swedish king named Gustav who we don't really need to get into all the details. There's actually
we know that bastard anyway up here.
But he was encouraged by Britain, by the Dutch Republic, and by the Prussians to attack Russia. Which even then the Europeans were always afraid of Russian power, always, just like they are today.
True.
And Russia was fighting a war against Turkey, the Ottoman Empire in the south, and they wanted Gustav to fight Russia on another front in the north. And Gustav, who really, I don't think was very bright, he was not popular at home, and he thought, like a lot of rulers before and after, hey, a good war will take people's minds off the fact that they hate me so much. And so he started a war, and what they did is they had the head tailor at the Royal Opera House in Sweden, in Stockholm, make Russian Cossack uniforms.
Wow.
And they staged an incident at the border. This isn't when Sweden controlled Finland as well, and they at the Finnish-Russian border there, and blamed it on the Russians and started a war, which actually was a really ruinous war for Sweden. But that's another story.
Well, lucky for us, we managed to break loose from them eventually.
Hell yes. But the real false flag phenomenon is starting truly in the 20th century. And the Japanese and the Germans were the real pioneers in the 1930s of this. Japanese in Manchuria did false flags. The Germans, obviously, we're talking about the Reichstag fire, and we're talking about the Gladwitz incident, the invasion of Poland is a classic false flag. The Japanese actually did quite a few. The Soviets in the invasion of Finland in 1940 was a classic false flag. So that was a certain type of false flag, basically primarily military to justify invasions. The Reichstag fire is a little different. That's like their 9/11. The interesting thing about a lot of the false flags then and now is that when a false flag is done well, it's well done. It's difficult to prove. I mean, to this day, it's been over 80 years, and there are still historians who will argue about, did the Nazis set the fire to the Reichstag? And,
really?
I mean, that's a minority.
Well, there are historians arguing that they didn't kill people in gas chambers.
No, true. I agree I understand what you're saying, but relating to the Reichstag fire, if you go into the academic historical circles, you're not going to get
consensus,
absolute agreement. You will get most historians will say, yeah, they probably did it. Goering admitted it after war and so on, but there's still uncertainty, and many of them will say, well, they just used that as an opportunity to pass the enabling act to give Hitler dictatorial powers. It was an opportunistic thing. I don't agree. I think it was a false flag.
But certainly you're aware of Webster Tarpley's list of criteria, like there often is a military exercise parallel to the
absolutely no. Webster Tarpley is so very important. He's such a great gift to this world of ours. Right. So as you move into the 20th century and into the 21st century, we start seeing the evolution of false flags. They become very sophisticated. I mean, vastly more sophisticated than what the Nazis or the Japanese or the Soviets did. And really, if there were an Olympics of false flag operations today, the United States would win the gold easily. And I would say, by the way, the silver would go to Israel and the bronze would go to Britain. So you have, in other words, the United States and its key geostrategic allies are really the leaders of perpetrating false flags. Back in the 1950s, this is one that we absolutely know of, the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, a NATO operation known as Gladio. Yeah. And anyone can look this up. This is one in which it's been proven and that the perpetrators are in prison. But Gladio, and we know primarily about the Italian component of Gladio, but what these operatives would do is blow up train stations and public places, killing hundreds of people, and blaming it on the communists and on the Red Brigade as an explicitly political decision to make people run to the kind of conservative right-wing government and oppose the communists. And they did this. We know that Mossad, or we're pretty darn sure that the Mossad in the 1970s and 80s was behind the bombings of Jewish delicatessens. This is a lot like Charlie Hebdo today. But in the 70s and 80s, there were cases of places being blown up in Paris. All right.
Yeah, and Italy too. Most of the so-called left-wing terrorism was actually done by fascists.
Right, and this was Gladio. A lot of this is Operation Gladio. But
is that tied to the stay behind?
Correct.
Then there's been even here in our country there's been huge revelations about that, like police people who were on their payment.
Yeah, and when you say stay behind, just so people understand, like after the end of World War II, the beginnings of the Cold War, the U.S. and its allies were, they were afraid, I guess we can say, that the Soviets might just sweep into Europe. And if that were the case, then what would the policy be? So you had a number of these nations leave behind covert operative teams, that their job would be, like to echo under the Nazis, you would have them organize as cells, and they would fight the invaders. Well, there was no Soviet invasion of Italy, so you still have these groups here, and they're sitting on their hands thinking, well, what do we do now? And this is what they ended up doing. But they did it with the knowledge of NATO command and apparently with the CIA knowledge. This is all part of the operations of the Cold War.
And let me interject, they were the natural continuation of Nazi intelligence groups under Galen.
Yes, I'm sure that's true. Like Galen's Abwehr were swallowed up by what became the CIA.
Exactly.
Those guys. And yeah, actually, when I start doing Gladio in my book, I will look to see what kind of Nazi connections there may be. I don't know of them offhand, but it wouldn't shock me.
Farrell writes a lot about it, so you can also check.
Oh, well, I'll ask him. Yeah.
So what will this book be called? Do you have a title for it yet?
Well, it'll probably be titled False Flags, and I'm coming up with my subtitle. I'm kicking around a few possibilities, but
cool.
I want it to be very identifiable, and I think if someone's searching for false flags, they should be able to find this book. But it'll be a history. And when I say analytical history, it's not simply going to be a chronological listing of events that I think were false flags. It's really going to be an attempt to understand the nature of a false flag, why they're a false flag, why we now live in an era of false flags today geopolitically. Why is the United States perpetrating them? How do we identify them? The whole idea of come up with every new damn false flag, whether it's Je suis Charlie or Boston Strong or any of these others. So it's almost as if they're coming out of a Madison Avenue marketing campaign, which is what they're doing.
I wonder if they can purchase it somewhere. We need a good false flag. Who can we go to?
You wonder. And then the fact that with these false flags, when you find a media narrative that immediately identifies the perpetrator, this is a thing that we see now with these false flags. Now, when you're talking about a breakaway civilization being a false flag, I would say I'm trying to be very careful with distinguishing what actually is it that constitutes a false flag. You can be very, very literal and narrow, or you can be broad with your description. So you can be narrow in saying, well, a false flag is only when a government or an intelligence agency does some horrible act like blowing up buildings and killing people and then blaming it on another party, like, say, terrorists. Well, that's obviously a false flag. But are there the health scares, the Ebola virus, or is the H1N1 scare, that benefits the pharmaceutical industry? Are these false flags? I would say the answer is yes.
Corporate false flag.
Corporate false flag. I think I would have to include those. And but I can't possibly include every single act of what I think is deception as a false flag. The book would never end.
Good point.
So I'm trying to have an analytical focus that makes sense to me and keep it all within a couple of hundred pages. It's a much bigger topic than when I set out about 6 months ago to do this. I thought I'll have this book done in 2015, but it's hard. It's really hard because every time I get into a case, I'm trying to be meticulous, and I don't want to just be sloppy with this. Obviously, it's got to be well. So I'm doing my best.
You need some of the medicine that Joseph takes when he writes to get through this in a decent time.
I just have to get rid of the kids. I have to get all the kids out of the house. And,
right.
I mean, I still have people living. Joseph, look, he has done an unbelievable amount of work, but I remember in the early years of this century, when my kids were little, I started noticing Joseph's work, and I thought, how's he writing so many books? And then I realized that he lives alone. Well, that helps.
Yeah. And he has a research team of devoted fans. He admitted he almost stopped personal research now because people sense everything to him.
Well, no, it's listen, and that takes nothing away from what he does. It's very, very important. I have people now who help me with research. I don't think I have a formal team of anyone. I'm still pretty much a lone person out this. In fact, I don't like to have too many assistants because I found that I'm a really bad supervisor. People have offered to help me with research, and I just don't know what to tell these people. So I haven't really been able to figure that part out.
Just make a mail that people can send stuff to, and you don't have to be tighter than that. If you have time to go through it, that's the question.
I have probably close to 10,000 unread emails.
Jesus.
I'm not kidding.
I see.
I mean, most of them are probably not that important for me to read, but I know I miss a lot. It's literally not possible for me in the course of a day to go through every single email I get. I do try to read the best ones each day, and I usually think I do, but I miss a few.
But I think we all look forward to this book. It sounds like you're taking your brilliant scholarly analytics that you provided in the UFO history cases. It sounds like you're approaching this subject with the same kind of sense and originality.
Thanks. I'm trying to. It's a matter of A, being careful, and B, being curious and brave enough, honestly, to go in. You need a certain amount of willingness to take a chance.
Yeah.
But also you have to be very cautious with your handling of the facts.
Sure. And we appreciate that you take that consideration. Now, we've had you on overtime here. Before we let you go...
I was expecting to do just two hours solid.
I know.
But it's been such a great... I've really enjoyed the conversation with you.
It's been a pleasure. Before we let you go, could you just quickly tell us which books you recommend us to get connected to the Breakaway Civilization concept?
Yeah, actually, there's an article I wrote that's on the web. I even forget where I put it's on my website, richarddolanpress.com. I did write one like a 3,000 or 4,000 word article on the Breakaway Civilization. I wrote this about 5 years ago. I just thought it'd be a good idea to put something out there on the web since it was being discussed.
Yeah.
People Google that. But in terms of my books, the two books where I really wrote the most about it would be AD After Disclosure, which I co-authored with Bryce Zabel, and I really spent quite a bit of time trying to describe my conception of a breakaway civilization. And then more recently, and I think probably better, would be my last book that I published a little over a year ago called UFOs for the 21st Century Mind, which I intended that book to be the best first book for anyone to read if they're interested in UFOs. I want it to be I want it to be an excellent overview of the subject that's sophisticated, that's not just superficial, that really gets into the deep politics and the history and the science, all of it. And in that book, I spent quite a bit of time on breakaway civilization, and in fact, referring to the research of Joseph Farrell and Catherine Austin Fitts and a number of other people who've contributed to developing this idea.
Excellent. People, you will notice that Richard Dolan has a heavy web presence with a lot of sites somehow connected to him. He has his own publishing company and all. But like we do with every guest, you can find his complete bibliography and biography and links to his different websites at our website where we present him.
Go for it.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Thanks a lot for your time, Richard.
Al, it was a real pleasure speaking with you. I appreciate the kinds of really in-depth questions that you asked, and I really like where the conversation went. And boy, that was a great interview. Look, we're just exploring what I have always felt is probably the most fascinating mystery of our time, and we'll understand a lot of it, and there's probably a lot of it that we just won't always get, but it's the journey is the reward. I really believe this. That pushing ourselves, we learn things that we would never have guessed otherwise.
Yeah, like Gandhi said, the goal is the way.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So thanks a lot for coming on. We'll twist your arm to get you back and continuing so that this program was just a preface to the next.
I look forward to it.
Me too.
Thank you.
Bye. And that concludes today's forum. But stay tuned and join us again when we'll explore with Richard the different scenarios around disclosure. Finally, let me express our many thanks to the handful of listeners who recently donated that really eased our expenses related to improvement of sound equipment. Come winter, we'll throw a giveaway where one of our sponsors will win a book of one of our guests. All sponsors also receive a link where they can download our programs as MP3 files, though of course everything will still be available free for all at the Tube. Thanks for your support and for tuning in. Signing off with sincere regards from your host Al and the forum team. Be seeing you.
Who is number one?